going to be three things that we're going to talk about here. One is understanding basic camera settings in relationship to working with your flash, right? Shutter speed, aperture, ISO, how that plays a role, how you would set up working in a room like this. I am, and by the way, I'm not showing you any of my work because of time. You can find me on Facebook. My email address is on the flyer that you have if you need to see my work. But I photograph people in places. That's my job. I'm a commercial editorial photographer. So I haven't done anything other than make sure my camera works in this room. So you're going to see me crash and burn or succeed in real time. So we're going to talk about how I would set up my camera settings for a situation like that. That's going to be number one. Number two is going to be something called motivating the practical. How many of you have ever heard of that term? Because it's a movie term. It's a movie TV industry term. But if you don't know the gentleman's name, Gregory Heisler, how many of you have heard of Gregory Heisler? Okay, she gets the bonus people in the middle of the room. Gregory Heisler is shot for Time Magazine. He's now faculty at Syracuse University. Person of the Year, cover of Time Magazine for the last 25, 30 years. That's pretty much the guy. He has a book, 50 Portraits. Google Gregory Heisler 50 Portraits on YouTube, where he does like an hour-and-a-half long talk at an art student meeting, and it's fantastic. It's amazing. Heisler heard this term and realized he'd use it in his entire life, and that was basically, how do I make my light that I am using to light my subject look like the light that is in the room, right? That's what they do in the movie industry. So when you see somebody lit by candlelight, unless it's something done by Kubrick, or I think it's Wolf Castle or something like that, usually that candlelight is a sunlight off scene that's mimicking candlelight. And we're going to talk about motivating the practical. And last, and most certainly boring, but very important, is the inverse square law. To understand, hello, Lord, and understand how that's going to play. Like, are you standing right? No. Here? If I stand right, stop. We'll see if this works. So, anyways, let's go ahead and walk through this. And since Lee looks so magical, right there. I'm not kidding. Come on. Whoa. So I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do this with a handheld microphone at the same time. Small thing to point out for those of you who shoot tethered. A lot of times we hate Lightroom, we hate Capture One. I didn't tell you to move, model. Stand right back there. Come on, you look fabulous. Let everybody look at you. Take it all in. So I'm shooting HDMI off my cameras now because you can plug HDMI in just about any TV set or projector out there, so you're able to see what's going on and be able to review images at the same time. So you'll be able to see my settings here. I'm on a tripod. I don't normally shoot, but my mirrorless camera doesn't actually go through the viewfinder when you plug it into HDMI, so I have no choice. So first order of business is understanding the relationship between aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, right? This is critical. This was the light turned on, working on location when I started off in photography. Understand that your shutter speed can be just about anything you want it to be when you're working with flash photography. It is the one part of the exposure triangle that doesn't have any impact on flash output, right? So you kind of treat shutter speed to control your ambient light. You use your aperture and your ISO to control your flash power and maybe a little bit of ambient light. So the first mistake that most people make when they're shooting in a location like this is that they set up a flash and they start to light their subject. That's mistake number one. Set up your camera, don't set up any flashes, and figure out what you want your ambient light to look like in this room. Now, in this case, I'm going to try to shoot an exposure where I can see these lights in the background, but if it doesn't work out, that's fine, we know that they're there. But I want to try to figure out, do I want the ambient light to be darker, one stop, two stops under? Do I want the ambient light to be even with the flash, right? Do I want it to be a little bit brighter, right? All of those things are going to factor into working. By the way, you're going to be my mic stand here in a second, so I'm going to hand this off to you. Yeah, exactly. I put you to work. I do. So that's what I'm going to try to do here. Now, right now, as you can see on my settings, I'm at a third of a second, ISO 100 at 3.5. Probably unreasonable settings for maybe somebody jogging down a jogging path, which I did recently a couple of weeks ago, using flash ambient on a running path. Everything would get really ugly and really blurry, even with freezing action in the flash. Lee's going to cooperate with me, maybe. So I don't have to worry about him doing sprints, but a third of a second might be a little too low. So I'm probably going to crank up my ISO and also increase my shutter speed. And I'm going to hand this off, if nothing more so I don't keep buzzing out the speakers. Thank you, sir. So I'll yell really, can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
All right, ditch that. You can hold on to that. So, Lee, do me a favor, shuffle step this way for me. There we go, right there. Oh, he's dead sexy. All right. So right now, I'm not worried about color. I'm not worried about anything like that. I'm just looking at the light in the room. Third of a second, ISO 100. A little too much. Most cameras can at least take ISO 400 without any major issue. So I'm going to go to ISO 400 and probably crank up my shutter speed at least to, say, a 30th of a second. He's not moving. He's going to cooperate with me. For those of you photographing animals, children who are not going to cooperate with you, that's where your shutter speed and your ISO are probably going to have to come up if you're working with ambient light. Lee's going to cooperate with me, so I don't have to worry about anything being a little blurry at a 30th of a second. I'm shooting on a tripod, doesn't really matter too much. My aperture at 4.0, I could probably lower that a little bit. Let's just go to 2.8. I want a little bit of a shallow depth of field, but I don't want it to be ridiculously shallow here. So, this is my ambient light. I'll take a picture. My meter says I'm 2 stops under. Oops. Yeah, you can applaud for that. And my histogram is way, way buried. I'm definitely underexposed, right? But for the moment, it's not a bad place to start. I'm not worried about it too much. Now, I'm going to introduce, and I apologize for everybody behind Lee right now, because, and by the way, if you're like, oh, this was a terrible place for him to set this up, blame Kippy. See, always people that have to blame. So this is an unmodified strobe, nothing fancy, at its lowest power. So a couple of problems here. First of all, okay, for a first attempt, I got lucky. I got unbelievably lucky. I'm not going to deny it in the least. This is at its absolute power, lowest power on the flash. We see a little bit of spill on the table in the background, but we'll pretend like this is an empty room for the moment for the sake of this class. The problem right now that I have with all of this is this is a big, giant, you lit this artificially type of portrait, right? There's no way that he is being lit by these lights in this room with this strobe, right? A lot of that is color balance. Some of that also has to do with shape. Also has to do with the fact that he is really significantly brighter than the room light, right? If you're trying to make this look like it balances in here, you're going to need to manipulate this a little bit more. Now, you could go into Photoshop or Capture One or Lightroom and lighten everything up. But I'll tell you, the easiest thing to do is understand this relationship about shutter speed to your ambient light. If I change my shutter speed here, I'm going to go from 30th of a second, so from 30th to a 15th of a second is 1 stop, to a 10th, a little bit of a maybe quarter stop. I'm going to come in and I'm just going to lighten everything up and I'm going to take the picture again. Now you'll notice that the light on Lee is exactly the same. There's no real change in light output here. If I had a light meter on him, there wouldn't be a significant change. Maybe a little bit because we're starting to see a little bit of the warm light from the room come over him because the shutter speed is so low, right? We're getting so much ambient light on him. But the flash power maintains its same amount because flash power, unless you were using some sort of weird flash rig where it's so fast that shutter speed would actually play a role, you're never going to see your flash speed and your flash output change by shutter speed. So the first thing that I start to understand about these 3 relationships is that shutter speed is what I'm going to use to control the ambient light or available light in the room. And we could go over a big, huge debate about what ambient or available means. In my definition, in this situation, ambient or available light is light that I'm not controlling with my strobes. That's how I define it. Some people say it's light that you can't control, but I could go in the back of that room and turn the dimmers down if I wanted to. So I can control that light if I wanted to. So in my case, I'm just judging this as light not coming out of my flash. So shutter speed is going to control your ambient or available light. Whether it's inside, whether it's in a certain location, makes no difference whatsoever, right? So it's the only of the 3 exposure triangle properties that will not be affected by strobe, right? So you can kind of play around with it. Now, if I open or close my aperture, that will change my flash power here. So if all of a sudden I say, well, I want a deeper depth of field to capture all that is Lee, right? All that is man.
You don't have that depth.
Can't be that deep. right? No lens can go that deep. If I go from 2.8 to 4.0, one full stop, not only do I lose a stop in ambient, but I also lose a stop in flash power, right? So a lot of times if you're working with speed lights and you're trying to get the most out of a speed light, what you could do is lower your aperture if you don't need that depth of field. If you're not doing a big group shot, if you could get away with a shallow depth of field, by lowering your aperture, you are in fact adding power back into your speed light because you're adding more light coming through the lens. Same is true with ISO. Let's go back to 4.0, 2.8, and then take our ISO from 400 to 800. Lee looks impressive. The flash is brighter because the ISO is greater. The sensor has essentially become more sensitive to light. I know that's not the technical definition, but we'll use it for the moment. The ambient has also become a spot brighter as well, right? So understand how that works. So if you're walking into a room and you are trying to get the ambient light not to be a part of the exposure whatsoever, crank your shutter speed as high as it will go, right? 1/200th, 1/250th if you're not in the realm of high-speed C. Lower your aperture, your ISO as low as it'll go, 200 to 100, and you're at least guaranteeing that your ambient is as low as it will go. You can at least raise your aperture up to lower it even further, but understand at that point, you're also starting to really affect the output of the flash. A big reason why I don't use speed lights as much as I used to is simply because a lot of times I need to get more light for shooting larger groups. With these two flashes, these two units, I've shot the entire McQueen Orchestra Symphony outside of the Pioneer Square, 140 students. Got them all, front to back, right? Hard to do with the speed light, very hard to do with these. I needed about 2 more, but you can make something like that work. But if you're working with the speed light, you can still make this work. So again, I walk into a room, I don't worry about my flash at the moment, I just set it up, try to figure out what I want my ambient light to look like, dial in my shutter, my aperture, my ISO, and that is my starting point. And you really, when you're doing this, you're going to change it. There's nothing that says that you have to stay locked into this setting. But maybe make the at least determination, do you want the light in the room to really be part of the exposure? Do I want this to be? And honestly, if I'm trying to make it look like I lit him using these lights, then yes, I want to probably have that ambient light and my strobe light to be about the same value, somewhere around there. Right? If I don't care, no problem. This is what not caring looks like, other than the disgust on Lee's face right now for me making a model. So here is as high as I can go without doing anything fancy. Right? So there it is at 2.8. The benefit of mirrorless is you get to see your exposure live. The downside of mirrorless is you get to see your exposure live. So I'll come up a couple of stops. There we go. Right? So now the room is not even a part of it. And by the way, I lit this with flash should just be the t-shirt that Lee is wearing. So this is a mistake that I see. People are like, oh, my flash photography, it looks really basic, it looks really there. And it's a lot of times it's nothing to do with the flash settings. It has everything to do with their understanding of how to control that ambient light. Right? In some cases, the ambient light stinks. You take it out, right? Or you lower it down. Sometimes it's amazing and magical. For 3 years, I photographed in Reno nightclubs. I'm the only sober person in the room from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning with about $5,000 worth of camera gear hanging around my neck. And by the way, if I was photographing at Lex, there was also a swimming pool in the center of the nightclub. Fun! Right? By the way, my settings in that room were 1/10 of a second at 4.5 on my aperture and ISO 800, and I just filled in everything with my speed light. And I let the club lights get taken in with 1/10 of a second, and I settled everything with my exposure on my flash. Right? And that was just years of kind of playing around trying to find that perfect formula. Trying to make it look like they were lit by the club lights rather than a big on-camera iPhone kind of look. Right? In this day and age of competing with people who are like, well, my iPhone takes amazing photos. How you craft portrait light is going to be the thing that if you're doing this for a living, or even if you're just doing it for a passion, this is what's going to separate you from the iPhone or the Samsung or whatever. How you doing, model?
So far, so good.
You need a Tic Tac. Don't feed the models. Tic Tacs, that's all. That's all the models get. All right. So, I'm going to take my ISO back up, say to 800, and I'm going to drop my ambient down here to say if I'm doing the room in the back, that's about even. That's what the camera at least thinks. And by the way, don't ever be afraid to do the following. Just turn your flash off. Eliminate the possibilities, right? We got enough going on with the exposure triangle. Turn your flash off if you're not too sure to take a look at it. So no flash. That's what my ambient, and that's what it looks like. So the ambient looks okay. The light on Lee is not so great. So I need to do something. Now before I worry about it too much, I'm going to modify the light. I only brought 2 modifiers. I got a slew of them. I think just because of the fact that I'm just shooting him from waist to head, I'm going to go with something small. So this is a collapsible beauty dish. This is by Chimera. Sir?
Isn't he already beautiful enough?
It's true. You're right. I am trying to work on God's will and making it better. So with that in mind, I accept the challenge and know that I'm going to fail. So everybody now uses collapsible beauty dishes. Essentially, all that a beauty dish is, it has a disc in the center, allows you to have kind of a harder light source with a little bit of fall off, a little bit of beauty. It's good for headshots. It's good for actually head-to-portrait shots. Some companies make these almost in a 36-inch size as well. So the bigger the dish, basically the bit more you're going to light evenly. Smaller beauty dishes, the light's going to fall off faster. I'm just choosing this just to get a little bit more softness on the already exquisite Lee. Simply Lee, is there any other way? So, just Lee. Just Lee. Now, one thing I'll tell you, for those of you who are using speed lights opposed to battery-operated strobes in the field, one thing I will tell you that made me really start to shift my game away from speed lights is something as simple as a modeling light, right? You're in low light situations, you're out in the field, or you just need to see where your light's going. With a little speed light, you ever done that pop? You're looking at the exposure, pop, your model's going by, pop, how you doing? Usually it's my retina's pop, I can't see anything, pop, yeah, I'm gonna need Hubble Space Telescope lenses in my contacts after the shoot. Now I can just put a modeling light on here, and I can just kind of see where that light is going to be. In that case, I'm going to go with this. And because I'm battery powered, I will also turn my modeling light off. So I have my ambient light set up. I'm just going to go ahead and take a picture, Simply Rugged, and now way, way, way too harsh. Now, here's an interesting thing, again, understanding the exposure triangle. If I wanted to, I could always knock down that exposure without touching the flash by increasing my aperture, right? So I think I'm at 2.8. Am I? Or 4.0? Where am I at? 2.8. So I can always go up to 4.0, but that's also going to take away from my ambient, right? While it's going to affect my flash power, it's also going to affect my ambient. So if I'm happy with my ambient light, I really need to focus on making sure that this light is set up. So I'll take it down a couple of stops. And we have something that looks like that, right? Not too bad. Lee's doing his best stoic look. I am Lee. There we go, hear me roar. So, by the way, at this particular point, I'm asking myself, is Lee the kind of guy to carry a concealed weapon? This could play a serious role in how the shoot goes. Right. So, maybe after this, Lee's like, that whole gun thing sounds pretty good to me now. Alright, so at the moment, I'm relatively happy with the way this looks. If I look at my histogram here, I got some blinkies going on. I really don't care about the blinkies on the tag. The histogram looks all right. As a small side note, I've been teaching for the Academy of Art in San Francisco now for the last year and a half. They're really big on something called exposing to the right, which I've really started using a lot. The problem with exposing to the right is it looks terrible when you look on the back of the LCD screen. But essentially, the theory goes that most of your actual image information happens in the first stop of your histogram, which your first stop of your histogram is from the right-hand side to here. So if you overexpose your imagery, the theory is that you can just bring down your exposure in post and you'll reduce noise, right? Now for some of us doing nighttime photography, landscape photography, not that big of a deal. But for sometimes for flash photography, I will overexpose a little bit. But the problem is that I have the client looking at it, they're going to be like, what the heck are you doing, right? So I have to play around with it. But for the moment, I'm okay with this histogram. I think Lee looks all right. And so far, so good, right? Now, Actually, let's just look at this a little bit. So I've used the exposure triangle to balance my exposure, to get things in. I'm trying to motivate the practical a little bit, which we're going to talk about more in just 1 second. But before I move on, questions. Because I've had enough coffee to jumpstart a Peterbilt truck. Where are you going? It's like Lindsay Lohan. It's like the minute the camera says cut, she's off getting cocaine. It's nuts. You need to cut down, but
I mean, I got the whole part about your aperture, but you're still losing your depth of field. So you're playing with your depth of field this whole time.
Right.
And you haven't been mentioning how you are keeping your depth of field in your focus as a photographer. So I just went, how do you balance that?
So, good question. Now, if this comes to me, like depth of field lens selection comes into me, like, what's the point of this portrait? Now, I'm just hired to take a portrait of Lee. The shallow depth of field that I have, the soft focus in the background, to me is okay, because he stands out, he becomes prominent, he's a little bit brighter than the rest of the room, there he is. But if this is Lee standing on his assembly line in his factory, right, and it's all about how he's modernized his assembly line, then, by the way, my lens selection here, I'm using a 55 millimeter, don't ask me, Sony, 55 millimeter Zeiss lens 1.8, right? Kind of my fun go-to, it's a really small but very sharp lens. But if somebody said to me, oh, you need to photograph him with seeing the entire assembly line, right, or his workforce, then I'm going to go a little bit wider on my focal length, so I see more of what's going on in the background. That's naturally also going to give me a little bit of a higher depth of field. And instead of shooting at 2.8, I'm going to shoot at probably f8 or f11, right? Because I'm going to see that depth going on.
And does that change your model, or does that change your strobe power?
It's absolutely going to change my strobe power. So 2.8 to 4, 4 to 5.6, 5.6 to 8, 8 to like 11. Yeah, I'm losing 3 or 4 stops, which I have to bring back up in flash lights. Right.
So yeah, you're bringing your flash power back up to compensate.
And that's where like if you have to shoot at f8 or f11 and you have to have your flash ways back because of it, that's where speed lights start to become problematic. Now, if you could have that speed light just right out of frame, f8, f11 is no problem for a speed light, right? But if you're shooting like not just Lee, but a group of Lees, you know, compatriots, right? All of his sexy crew, right? On the assembly line of hotness, then you're going to need more flash power, to be sure, right? And I'll get into that with the inverse square law in a moment. But yeah, good question. So yeah, so in this case, this is a lovely room I get to photograph Lee in, but the room is not nearly as important as Lee. If he was in a historical place that I'm trying to document him in that place, then yeah, I'm not at 2.8, I'm at f8, f11. I'm probably using my 35 millimeter rather than my 55, or maybe even a 24 millimeter or something like that to showcase the entire scope of the room.
And you just know, and I don't mean to take time.
No, that's okay, you can even do
you just know, I don't want to hear the rest of this. You just know how far to change your speed lights through experience. How much to compensate for. If you say you had to shoot Lee in this magnificent room and still make Lee look magnificent, do you just know in your mind that you're going to adjust your flash to 2 stops above or 2 stops below or wherever it may be?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I would usually do in that case is I would start with my ambient exposure. I would probably shoot at least my meter zeroed out for the ambient with no flash, maybe zeroed out, so 0.0 right in the middle of the metering scale, or maybe like a third of a stop under, maybe just slightly a little bit underexposed, just so that my subject pops just a little bit more, so I have a little bit of contrast, it's not so flat. And then at that particular point, if all of a sudden I'm like shooting at 2.8, and then I'm like, oh no, somebody says to me, we really need to get more depth of field going on in the background here, right? Then it would be like, this is where understanding how your stops go. Like ISO 100 to 200, you gain a stop. ISO 400 to 200, you lose a stop, right? Shutter speed, 1/60th to 1/125th, you lose a stop. 1/125th to 1/60th, you gain a stop. Everybody always goes, why do I have to memorize this kind of thing? Well, because if all of a sudden I go from 2.8 to f8, all that I have to do is go to the back of my flash, which it goes from 2.0 to 10, 2.0 to 3 is a stop, 3.0 to 4.0 is a stop. So if I've increased my aperture, so I've lost 4 stops of light, I just go to the back of my light or the back of my speed light and go up that way. Speed lights are a little bit tougher because speed lights, while they are in stops, they're also kind of proprietary stops. Where, you know, ProPhotos, Alien Bees, that kind of stuff, when you're going up a stop, you're truly going up what they think is an actual stop. Now, is it dead accurate? No, it's not, right? And every lens is a little bit different, every manufacturer is different, but at least I'm in the wheelhouse. And if I'm in a rush, I'm close enough that I can fix it in post. I don't like to, right? But if I have to, like, it's like, hey, you've got 8 locations that you got to make happen in a half a day, right? I'm gonna get close, get the emotion from the subject, and move on to the next thing, for sure. Great question, sir.
You're talking about specific speed light or light modifiers and so forth. There's a couple things that I think of that might be good in a room like this, like a Gary Fong type of reflector that you can shoot up at the ceiling and illuminate the entire room, really get the light more balanced. The other one is you mentioned adjusting your flash outputs when you adjust the aperture. And I think Einstein has one that it controls everything. If you change something on your camera, it adjusts all the lights automatically.
Yeah, ProPhoto has a mode, and a lot of other companies have done this where you can be, I don't have the transmitter for it. There's limitations on my Sony, so I'm using the generic one. But you could be in TTL mode, right? Have multiple flashes set up. And in this case on the Sony, it's kind of hard to see, but my Sony has a movable spot meter. There it is, right there, that circle where my heart is, right here on my hand. So not only is that my focus point, that's also my spot meter. So I can put that spot right on Lee's face, be in TTL, hit it, go up or down and stops in TTL, but then also go right into manual, and boom, I'm in manual mode, and now I can fine tune in manual, and then I don't have to worry about the camera meter changing. So if I recompose and I show more or less of the background, I don't have to worry about that. Back to your the Larry Fong thing, it's an excellent point. If I was working on a speed light, that would absolutely be the case, but I have to wait now for the signal to come back. I'm dealing with the ambient light issues, the glow, by using the ambient light at the shutter speed in this particular case. So all that I'm worried about is trying to make that glow look similar to what's going on, right? And you can actually see it on the top of his head. There's the ambient glow from the light coming off the ceiling here. But yeah, if you were on camera with a speed light, something that throws light up as well as out, I use a mag mod, but something like that would work out as well. All right, good questions. So, moving on from the exposure triangle a little bit, we'll come back to it with the inverse square law in a moment. I want to talk about motivating the practical, right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to motivate. I'm trying to modify this light so I'm getting output that is closer to the ambient light in the room. Now, the first thing that you want to think about when doing this is trying to get your light to have the same white balance or color gel of the actual light in the room. Now, these look like a pseudo-tungsten. Maybe they are a true tungsten incandescent light bulb in the room. Who knows? We're going to figure this out. Now, I have, as a kit, I have a gel kit, which I stack someplace. So this is ProPhoto stuff, and the only reason why I like it is that it's already cut down for me. So they got this little thing that slides on the front. If there's a weak link in this particular system, it says this plastic collar will make me look like a buffoon in a second as I try to slide it on the actual beauty dish. But I could actually slide this on and then have my softbox or whatever still on here. So the gel is inside a softbox, it's inside a beauty dish. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. The other thing that I like about this is on all of their gels, and I just so happen to get this. So for example, when you're working with flash, that's balanced to daylight, right? So if you're trying to make daylight in the tungsten, you're going to put on 2 types of gels, one or the other. Either a CTO, color temperature orange, which that's what this is, or sometimes a little bit better, CTS for color temperature straw, which doesn't have the red in it. If you've ever used CTO, sometimes it will get people, especially if they're already a little bit red in the face, it will get that red to pop out a little bit more. You're in Photoshop, you're moving stuff around.
So what's your white balance set on your camera?
Oh, who knows?
Okay.
Yeah. It's probably set to auto white balance at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, because he looks, because I haven't shot it, I'm going to try to shoot a gray card, I don't worry about my white balancing camera.
Okay.
The only time I worry about my white balancing camera is if I have a client looking, and then I don't have to have the explanation of why he looks a little bit blue, a little bit green. I'm going to fix it in post. Right, I'm going to shift my white balance, but I usually don't worry about it that much. There are people who try to get their white balance right out of the gate, but what you're going to see in a moment is I'm about to make this slightly tungsten. There's no slightly tungsten setting in camera. I mean, yeah, I can customize it, but I'm not going to waste my time doing it, so I'm not super worried about it. So the one thing that I like about ProPhotos gels over everybody else's, and I have binders of gels, right? I have Boulder Flex. I go out and buy the sheets, I cut them down so they go over all my reflectors. I label them all with the wax, with the white Sharpie pen so my assistants can see them. But the one thing that I like about ProPhotos gels is not only do they tell you what they are, but they also tell you what the light loss is. So it tells me immediately if I put this gel on this light that I'm going to lose one full stop of light. So before I have to put this on, take a picture, oh it's too dark, take it up. How much do I need to take it up? This actually tells me you need to move one full stop in one direction or another direction. So if we do, I should really try and do this in front of everybody. If I put this gel in here and try to motivate the practical as far as color temperature, thereby making Lee look even sexier than he already is. Is it possible? No, it's not. I am trying to manipulate Reagan. Good luck. Good luck. See, I told you. If anybody happens to work for ProPhoto in the room, I hate you for this thing. I love you for it, but I also hate you at the exact same time. Yeah. There we go. Once you get it on, it's great, but till then.
How much do those lights cost?
They're not cheap.
1,000?
A light.
1,000 a light?
Probably closer to that. I think I think it's closer to 1,500. Yeah, but there's a lot of like Godex now, or Gotex or whatever. There's a lot of companies that are making similar products, and I think that they're a far better way to go. And the only thing that the only mark that I'll make for owning something like this is, I go on the road a lot. So let's say that I'm in Salt Lake City and all of a sudden one of my ProPhotos dies on me. I can call just about any rental house and they carry ProPhoto, right? That's the benefit to shooting that system, is that every rental, and ProPhoto was smart in the mid-1990s, they basically gave their lights to all these rental houses. So professional rental houses, Lens Pro to Go, borrowed lenses, they all carry ProPhoto. So that's the benefit to me, is I have that system. It can be there the next day if I absolutely need to, or in some cases, there in an hour if I'm in a big enough city that has a rental house. But outside of that, there's a lot of pros using ProPhoto, but it's very hard to balance that against, like, I could have bought 6 lights for $3,000 opposed to just getting 2 in a cool backpack, you know. So
The backpack is the finishing deal.
the backpack got me my girlfriend. So.
Does she blow up?
She doesn't blow up. That's a good one until I tell you what. She's in the back room. You also started to look, is she? Alright. So that took obviously longer than it needed to. And the fun thing is I'm probably not in the right direction. Alright, Lee, back to your spot model.
Alright.
So I know that I have to come up a stop because I put that gel on. He looks too quick. Boom, there we go. Now, he's a little too warm, right? He's a little too orange here. But he's close to what the room is, right? If I turn off this light and shoot this picture again, if you compare them from here to here, the light's pretty darn close to what's in the room. I motivated the practical as far as the white balance goes. Now, personally, aesthetically speaking, for some of you in this room, you're like, great, good, you're done. For others in this room, you're kind of like, well, maybe you want him to be just a little bit closer to white balance of daylight than tungsten, right? So that's where instead of using a full cut of CTO, you could use a half cut of CTO, or you could use a straw. So, just for an example, at least in this kit from ProPhoto, and by the way, if you're not using ProPhoto, you could go hop on, go to any camera store or whatever, they'll carry these as rolls. So it's kind of hard to see, but this is a half cut, this is a quarter cut, right? So a half cut is half as much orange, a quarter cut is a quarter as much orange. So you can kind of balance this and work with it. You can overlap, so if you had a full cut and you wanted to do another half cut, like you really wanted it to be orange, you could do 1.5 cuts of CTO. So if somebody says, give me a full cut, they're talking about regular CTO. They go half, it's a 50%, quarter, 25%, right? And they go on. Let me see if I can find my straw really quick. Lee, how you doing? Great. How you feeling about all this?
A little warm.
Is there anything that could get you like a spritzer or something like that?
Last charging.
I can't find my straw off the top of my head, so I'm going to go with a half a cut of CTO.
Question, how long will that light stay on?
Until it runs out of power.
No, but how long is that, do you know?
Not off the top of my head, because so great question. How much battery life can you get out of something like this? It all depends on your power, how long you leave the modeling light on, that kind of stuff. You leave the modeling light on, you're probably getting 45 minutes before the whole thing shuts off. No modeling light I shot for a full day without having to change the battery. Don't shoot at full power, so you're shooting halfway in the middle of the range of it, you're definitely going to get 1,000 shots out of it. But if you shoot at full power, you're close to, I think, like 120 shots. So there's a lot of variables that it's hard to say, like, oh, this is the way it's going to be. I don't go out in the field without backup batteries, and there's also been times I've had to charge in the field as well. So it just depends on the shoot. All right, so half a cut of CTO. Fire this back up. Only a half a stop power difference. I'll go ahead and make that setting on my camera. Lee's going to look right into me. International man of mystery. How you doing, sailor? There you go. So, full cut of CTO, half cut of CTO. Just a little bit less, right? And if I thought that it was still too much, I could go to a quarter cut, but you can see where that's potentially going, right? So, I've motivated the practical as far as white balance goes. There's one last problem, and this is a pet peeve that I have when I see a lot of people working with flash photography, is that they work in a room and they don't use another light to try to separate the model some way, shape, or form, right? Like if you're shooting outside in the sun and you darken down your ambient so much that the sunlight's not really a factor, but you're trying to make it look like it's sunlight, you need like a little bit of a glow behind them, something like that, right? So this comes into play, like how do I make this look like he's just not flatly lit in the room? How do I make this maybe a little bit more dynamic? I could bring up the exposure on my flash a little bit, which I think I want to do, but what I'm actually going to do, and I'll use my full cut of CTO here, is I'm going to actually use a second light. And the second light is only going to be for one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to try to make it look like the light from the chandelier is hitting Lee on his noggin as much as possible. I like how everybody's like, uh-oh. Like, I don't know if that means like, uh-oh for Lee or uh-oh for me.
It's like a Lee halo.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Now, I should say normally I use Lee filters, but I thought that would be a little bit too much.
Oh, you saw.
Exactly.
I didn't say anything.
So now we're going to go glow.
This is going to be almost like
All right, coming through. Watch out. Kippy said, do you have enough room in here? I like laughed. I'm like, no, I don't.
Light stand.
Well, then in that case, I do not care. All right, so Lee, go back to facing where you were on the camera. So all that I'm going to do with this, I have a gel on here, and I also have a grid. The grid is really just meant to kind of keep the light off the tables, the people in the foreground here, just to get me a little bit of light. Lee's going to face the camera. He's still moving. See, you gotta work with these models. He's squirming.
He doesn't listen to anybody.
He doesn't.
Yeah. He's that way.
There we go. So now you can kind of see the modeling light. Now I can see that there's going to be some spill on the table. This is the benefit of the modeling light. For those of you in the back of the room, you can see that the table right behind Lee is getting a little bit of light on it, right? So if I had the time, and it felt like changing out this grid, I would change it just to make sure that that was a little bit of a tighter beam. Because all that I'm really trying to do is get a little light, a little bit more light on Lee's shoulders, right? Why? Because I'm trying to motivate the practical and make it look like this light is actually lighting him and the ceiling is dropping down. And that way, if I change my ambient light, I could go ahead and still maintain that. By the way, always sandbag your lights. Don't be that person who gets into a lawsuit because you didn't want to lug around 25 pounds of rocks. All right. So that is at 5.0. I'll probably have to change that. Change that remotely. So Lee, take a shuffle step this way for me. Now my light's in my frame. I'm not going to worry about it too much at the moment. Double beeps. So that light's a little too bright, and also it's directly in my face. But first of all, I'll deal with the power. Taking it down a couple of stops. So before, after, right? So if, just to show you the difference, if I turn that light off now, just a little bit of a, so see it in his hair, see it on his shoulders, see it on the other shoulder? There's a little bit of a light, there's a separation light going on. Now, I can just, he's a guy. He's the guy. There's been many men, but none like Lee.
Sweet. Oh, look at that. Oh.
So, now the benefit to this is, right, I now have motivated the practical that that light is simulating these globes a little bit. Not a lot. If I had the time, I had an assistant in here, I would get this dialed in before somebody walked in, I would maybe bring that light almost all the way up in the air and point it down. I actually have a light called a pancake, that it's a softbox that's flat on one side and a dome on the other, and I can boom it over and go directly over a subject. And I can recreate this light directly over somebody, right? There's a lot of different solutions to this. But this isn't a bad solution. This is a nice and quick. That could be a speed light. That could be an SB800 on a pocket wizard. This could be an SB800 on a pocket wizard, right? Or some sort of generic thing from China, whatever you want to do. I can go ahead and make that light happen. But here's the interesting thing. Because I've motivated the practical, because I'm trying to make it look like the ambient light, if I change my shutter speed now, right, everything in the room gets a little bit darker, but that flash power stays right around there. I'm getting the same motivating practical here. So let me turn that light back on. So let's actually do this right. There we go. So there you go. And just because somebody's going, well, this looks terrible because the white balance doesn't look the same. I was in daylight, by the way, somebody asked. So here's incandescent, or tungsten. There you go. Now, one benefit to using, say, like a quarter cut of CTO on this light, and say a half cut of CTO on that light is, Lee would be a little bit more blue, and the light would be a little bit more yellow. If I balance my white balance by using a gray card in front of him, just for this light, then Lee would be a little bit, he would be properly exposed, but everything in the room would be just a little bit warmer yellow, right? And I have that option as well. And usually what I do is I shoot my gray card after I get everything dialed in. By the way, gray card shots are the best right underneath the chin, sir.
because that's when usually Lee lets down his guard.
Smile.
Oh, wait a minute. Take a side step. Go this way for me, Lee. There you go. He keeps missing his mark.
Now we need a profile shot too.
There you go. So now I can go into post. These also have warming grays on here, so I can warm this up a little bit, right? Balance this out. That room would maybe become a little bit warmer. Lee wouldn't be as blue, right? And it would balance out a little bit. So I don't worry about the white balance so much because I can fix it in post. I shoot in raw. I'm sure all of you do. If you don't, I just, at this, it's 2018, I don't even know what to say. What? Where's that on my phone? It's probably very deep. So I've motivated the practical now that I have this stuff, and I can continue to shoot at my leisure, right? And I can just kind of figure out where I want this to be. Now the only problem with dragging the shutter a little bit, shuttle this up this way a little bit more for me. There we go. The problem with, if I make this ambient too present, right, is at a particular point, I will get that ambient light start to affect my exposure, right? That's the only problem when you start to lower or drag the shutter a little bit too much. So, motivating the practical. So the solution to that is, always when you're walking into a room, go, what do I want my ambient light to be? How much of it do I want to be a part of the exposure? And if I want it to be part of the exposure, do I want to make the light in the room look like it's part of the actual exposure, right? Do I want to make people guess and see if it's lit? My favorite thing in the world when somebody goes, how did you light that? Like, it's not so apparent. Like, there's not a giant umbrella reflection in their eyeball, and the room is pitch black, and they just stand out, and there's nothing separating them. I like it when they go, how did you light that? Oh, I lit that with, you know, this or that. And I like that. I like that people have to guess. And maybe think that maybe he's not even lit. Now, I mean, there's a lot more that we could do, but Kippy only gave me an hour, so this is where we're at. Questions? Motivating the practical exposure triangle so far. Yes?
Okay, I'm going to try to ask this the way I think. If you're going down in your, if you're allowing more light into your camera with ambient light,
Right.
are you also changing your white balance with every stop?
Your white balance will shift a little bit because it becomes brighter. This light becomes more present, so your white balance will change.
Okay, so if you have a longer shutter, are you getting a deeper orange?
Yes, essentially. In this room, you would.
That's what I was asking.
You know, but at a particular point, the deeper orange would start to give way to being a brighter light. So there would be this point where it gets a little bit more orange, and then all of a sudden it would get a brighter yellow, and then it would start to become bright white light because you've overexposed it so much.
Okay.
So, long story short, I don't worry about that too much because I do my white balance once I get all my settings dialed in.
Okay.
That's why I don't worry about what my camera's white balance is set at. That's why I don't do the expo disc beforehand. I just do it at usually the last shot that I take of anybody is them just holding a gray card. That's the last shot of the day, right? I got the lens on that I want to use. I got the because when you change lenses, you should do a new white balance because every lens is a little bit different, especially using different manufacturers. I shoot Sony, so I have Sony glass, Sigma glass, and Canon glass. All three lenses, not to mention just 3 different variations and models, will shift white balance a little bit. So once I get the lens on that I really want to use, aperture sometimes can make a slight difference, especially if it's a radical change in aperture. So once everything's dialed in, I'll usually be like, okay, go ahead and hold the gray card and we'll go ahead and shoot. And that's usually the last shot. And it also makes it easy too because then I just go to the end of that shoot, click on that, and then select the rest of the images and fix it either in Capture One or Lightroom.
Okay.
But,
so if you have somebody, and this happens to me a lot, if you have a client who's like, oh great, I love that picture of Lee, can I throw 5 more people in?
what a great segue to inverse square law. That's perfect. So do you have another question or I'll answer that?
No, was it a fixate that you have to, do you go, okay, hold on, I have to stop.
Yeah, I do. And that's why I try to work that stuff out with the client as much as possible, right? You cannot, I do film, TV as much as I do still photography. And the one thing still photographers don't do enough that people who shoot TV or movies do, something called pre-production. Or they like to say in the initial pre-pro, because pre-production is just too much for them to actually say. So in pre-production, you have shot lists, you have takes, this camera, this camera. It's literally the day that you're actually shooting, you're just connecting the dots, right? Photographers don't do that enough. And when I talk to a client, I go, all right, how many people will we have in this location? We got 1 person. But we might have 3 or 4 people. We don't know because we might We might get lucky and the board of directors might be there at that time. I used to shoot at IGT. For 8.5 years, it was me and one other guy that shot in the entire company. And let me tell you, they would throw you curveballs all the time, right? And you're working in a casino, you've been working all night long to get that Wheel of Fortune machine look great. You're about to have your model step in. And I kid you not, all of a sudden, an old lady with an O2 tank and a cigarette, and she sits right down, and we got like 14 lights. We had a giant crane for a video camera, and she does it. Are you photographing? No, sketch work. Keep going. That's fine. We'll sit here and wait on you. You never wanted somebody to lose so bad in their life. Just $20. Right? So I tried to work that out as much as possible. But if somebody came in and said, we need to make this happen, we need to light this, this light modifier is not going to work for 5 people. I'm going to probably need to change my light modifier, right? So that's going to be fun here in a second. And I'm going to have to splice with some flash power, but that's exactly where Dennis wanted to go anyways at the beginning of class, so now you've caught up with Dennis. You guys are in the same DeLorean time frame now. Other questions before we move on to inverse square law?
1986.
I got 15 minutes. All right, so Lee, stand right here. You, stand right here. Sir, stand over to this side. Sir, Dave. David, come over here. I got my group. Now, first order of business. Lee is the head of this motley crew. Lee's going to stand right here. Your toes are going to be right there, sir. All right, there we go. 3 of you just take a little bit of a step back for me. Would you please help me? That way, there we go. Dave, hug it a little bit. There we go. All right, so first order of business. When somebody throws you a curveball, David, come out this way just a little bit. There you go. When somebody, and Dave, get in a little bit tighter there. When somebody throws you a curveball, don't freak out. Because you might be able to solve it, and I do know that this flash is in the way. I don't care at the moment. I got 15 minutes. I got to make this work. So right now, somebody goes, hey, listen, Lee Olson goes, hey, I got my 3 buddies from college. Can you photograph the 3 of us? And it's like, okay, take the picture. Just see what happens, right? You never know what is going to happen. Now, first of all, I'm in 2.8, so odds are everybody but Lee's out of focus, right? So Lee's in focus, but Dave's not, right? So 2.8 is probably not where I need to be. Probably need to change my lens as well, and that kind of stuff. But I take the picture just to see where I'm at. Now, the other problem is, I'm going to bring this in just a little bit here just to emphasize this. Because I'm going to take my aperture up to account. So let's go to 5.6, probably a little too much. This is what you love, when people throw you curveballs and you get to do all this stuff in front of somebody who's paying you money. Right? So that needs to come up a couple of stops. So notice something, and this is what we're going to call the inverse square law. Notice that Lee, in all of his majesty, is much brighter than everybody else.
As he should be.
As he should be. Now, if this is the intent, fine, good, I'm done, print, wrap, call it a day, right? But it's not the intent. I need to get all 4 of these individuals with the exact same. Now, I know I got a shadow here. I'll fix that when I move the light and change the light modifier. But I have to get all 4 of these individuals in balance here. Now, the problem is the inverse square law. The inverse square law basically says, as light goes out, that power has it lost that is inversely squared. Essentially means at 1 foot, your light is at 100% power. Whatever it's set at, you get 100% of that. At 2 feet, it's 25%. At 3 feet, it's 9%. The biggest mistake that people make when they're working with flash photography, and when I say people, I mean me, is that they think, oh, to get David brighter, I'll move the light in. Right? All that I've ensured now is that the fall off from Lee to David is now even more radical. Right? So, even though that this is in the frame, let us imagine, shall we? Right now, Lee is much brighter, as he always is, because he fills out the crossword every Sunday. He is much brighter than his cohorts, right? The fall off is even greater. Now, this is really useful. Like, if you got one light and you're trying to make a white background look black, You take your subject, you take the light, and you move them together, the same distance, you move them away from your white wall. Because the light fall off on your subject is so radical, by the time it gets to the white wall, it's gray. Move it further back, it's dark gray. We even move it further back, it's black, right? You want your subject and the white wall to be white, put your subject right behind the white wall, shoot it with one light. You're going to get a shadow, but you can fix that by moving the light up or down. The inverse square law is huge because more often than not when we're shooting groups, all of a sudden that's our first experience with, oh, how do I balance this out? And the solution is a little counterintuitive. The solution is this. Get your light away from your subject. Now, because I've gone away from my subject, I'm just going to put this at 5.0. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. This is going to look horrible. I always like telling my clients that at the very beginning. You're going to look terrible when I do this. But now, even though the light is bad, it is even, right? Or closer to being even. I'll take this up in power. Three stops. Some people will always ask me why 3 stops, and I'll just tell you right now because it sounds good. I'm guessing at this particular point. Now, the light is still pretty rakish, or still pretty severe off of both subjects. So my solution is move the light further back. I moved it back. It's lost power. It's at full power right now. Everybody get ready to see God. A little too bright, but now it's a little bit closer. I can solve this by moving them back a little bit if I need to. Where speedlights fail you is group shots. Because you need to have that flash maybe another 2 feet behind, right? I'm at full power on a 500 watt second unit, right? To get them a little bit more even, I probably have to raise up the ISO a little bit, play around with the aperture just a touch, but I could get them evenly lit. But I'm not going to get them evenly lit with a low power unit like a speed light, right? Also, continuous lights have this problem as well. A lot of people now are shooting with more continuous light. Inverse square law applies to all light. It also, by the way, applies to sound. It's the exact same principle. And heat. Well, heat a little bit, but mostly to sound. So, you know, if you have like a cool little video LED light, and you got 2 subjects and you're really close, unless those subjects are at the same shoulder plane as the light, you're going to have light fall off. And you move a little LED light back, and it's almost negligible at a certain point. That's why a powerful light source is preferred this way. So now, my crew, David, take a half step to your left. Thank you, get out of that shadow. So this is where I'm shooting right now. I'm at 30th of a second, I got that light in the background. I love the look, like she's just like, Lee, I do not like your beauty. Your attitude is not good. Right? So I'm going to drag my shutter just a little bit more. I'm going to bring that shutter in. I'm going to go to a 1/5 of a second. I'm at 5.6. Everybody 1, 2, 3. There you go. Right? It's a little bit more balanced. It's better than that. Right? So by understanding where I can move these things around, understanding the inverse square law, understanding motivating the practical, I mean, this isn't going to go anywhere other than Facebook to embarrass all 4 of these people, but it's not going in my book by any means. But I mean, we can move that light behind them, we can move this around, we could balance that gel out a little bit more, but we could definitely dial this in just a touch and get a group photo. I'm just starting to get really close to my wrap-up time, and I want to leave a little time for questions. So, don't move, model. No Tic Tacs for you. So we have this control, but the inverse square law. If you're shooting individual portraits, right, multiple lights where you can control your background lighting and your subject, inverse square law not that big of a deal. But the minute you have groups of people, a wedding party, right, a family reunion, a group photo like this, you have to start thinking about getting that light source away from your subject and cranking up that power to compensate. Otherwise, all that you're going to have is the sexiest man in the world brightly lit and everybody else is going to be dim, and they don't want that. They want to shine in his light. Have a big hand for our models. So again, when you come into a situation, start off by taking a picture before you set up any lights. Figure out what the ambient light looks like. How much do you want it to play a role in your exposure and in your photography? Right? Start there. Understand that shutter speed is going to be the setting that's going to give you the most amount of use out of ambient light. Obviously, ISO and aperture do as well, but shutter speed is nice because it kind of isolates, right? Think about motivating the practical. Think about trying to make that light look like it belongs, rather than you're just lighting somebody, rather than they're just glowing in the middle of nothing, right? There's nothing worse, in my opinion, than it's just like, I just set up a light, boom, off at 45, softbox, done, right? It's 2018. We got to be better with our work. So start thinking about, well, if I did this, if I did that, stuff I didn't do, I could have put a grid on that, so I could have kept that light off of this table, just focused it on lead. Put a tighter grid on that light, kept it from moving onto that table, right? Played with these CTOs a little bit. And I haven't done anything in this room until this moment, so that's the reason why a lot of the stuff I'm kind of like, oh, I have to shift this, I have to shift that one, because I haven't done it yet. So, motivate the practical. Think about your inverse square law if you have multiple people. For those of you doing wedding photography, brides, grooms, this is the reason why your groom is always a little bit darker than your bride. He's standing behind the bride, and you're just a little too close with that flash unit. Move it back a little bit, put a little bit more power in that unit. You'll balance out your exposures on the face. I got a few minutes for questions. Sir?
Just quickly, this is great with all these lights, but hobbyists and amateurs sometimes can't afford to pay $2,000 or $3,000. So just addressing, I use like 7-foot umbrellas and different things with speed lights and stuff.
Sure.
Sometimes just for...
My entire beginning of my career was all speed lights.
Maybe just a quick address of being able to just replace these with speed light and an umbrella.
So if you're doing this with speed lights, the problem that you're going to run into comes back to the inverse square law. You max out your power on your speed light. You're 1/1 in manual mode. How do you double the power of your speed light? You got a second speed light. How do you double the power of 2 speed lights? 4 speed lights. Somebody paid attention to math. From 1 to 8 to 16. Right? Somebody once asked me, why did you stop shooting speed lights? Well, at a particular point, no matter if you're a hobbyist or an amateur, speed lights cost you more money than professional units. Because that is 500 watt seconds, right? A speed light is somewhere between 80 to 100 watt seconds. That means that's 5 speed lights, right? Now, if you're buying Chinese knockoff copy stuff, fantastic, great, you're going to get there. But if you're doing a Canon 600 RT, which I did, I had 4 of them. That's $2 grand for 4 lights, right? But if you had to deal with speed lights, you're going to gang them up. You want to look for units that hold. There's units that hold 2, 3, and 4 speed lights. Put them in a silver umbrella. You're going to get more power out of your unit. You're going to create a larger light source, to be sure, right? That would be an effective way to do it. You would have to gel each speed light to make sure that you're motivating the practical for this room. That's easy to do. A lot of times these speed lights come with gels anyways. If not, you can go ahead and just buy one sheet and cut them down for that particular usage. Just the problem with speed lights is you just need more of them, right, in some cases. Now again, if you just have Lee in this room by himself, 1 speed light, 2 speed lights, you probably are getting the exact same output, no problem. No problem, right? But groups of people, that's where speed lights start to become ineffective. And for some of us in this room, we'll never go past that. It's a wedding couple and that's it, right? That's the biggest groups that we'll do. In my case, we shot 1,500 people for IGT once on a scissor lift, right? So, you know, we needed the power. And all that we were doing was just slightly filling in the shadows because we had them outside in front of the building. So there's always those pros and those cons. Again, units like this have become much more cost effective now. There's a lot of companies that are making similar kind of stuff. You could also, for years, I just ran white lightnings on their little lithium ion battery packs and ran them out there. It was clunky, it was a little cumbersome, but it worked. It gave me, you know, 400 watt seconds, 500 watt seconds in the field, no problem. And those lithium packs, you can also charge your cell phone at the exact same time. It's kind of awesome.
They won't run a George Foreman grill, though.
They will not run a George Foreman grill. So, sad news, ladies and gentlemen. The takeaway for today is Lee's sexy and you can't run a George Foreman grill off of a falsy buff lithium ion pack. Other questions? None? Sir?
So where do you feel like you get to the point where you're shooting that at a 1/5 when the ambient's going to be strong enough that there could actually be some motion blur if, you know, somebody shifted from side to side a little bit.
Lee, will you stand right here for me?
Blame it on Neil.
Blame it on Neil. It's all Neil's fault. I'm just going to come in just for a tighter.
It's always my fault.
It's always his fault. So, Lee, I want you just to wave your hand like this. So, 1/5 of a second, a little bit of motion blur. Bring the flash closer, lower the power, the flash duration becomes shorter, therefore it frees action a little bit more. So, I mean, it really depends on how fast that they were moving.
Right.
And also your flash power. So there's not a definitive number that you can do. So just so you know, as your flash power goes up, the duration becomes longer. Flashes don't emit more power. They emit the same amount of power for a longer length of time. Right? This is called the flash duration. It looks like a bell curve. It ramps up, it peaks, it slams down. So if you have your flash power very, very low, that means the duration is like a spike. It's a blip. That means it would freeze action faster. I know that you're probably not going to be able to freeze action in the way that you want to with a really low flash source, but that is unfortunately kind of the situation. At full power here, the flash duration becomes a little bit longer, so it might pick up a motion. But it is that balance of your flash power, essentially, and your shutter speed. Yeah, and I would say it just really kind of depends on what you're doing. I would say if you are in the realm where you can throw your camera in a rear curtain or slow shutter, at least you would get a better looking result than you would on a forward or front curtain. But other than that, yeah, you just kind of have to play with it and see. You know, and again, if you just have a single subject, the solution maybe would be bring that flash in a little bit closer, right? Lower your power down, and maybe at that shutter speed that you got a little bit of motion blur would go away with the slower flash duration. But because you brought it in, the flash is going to emit more power. For sure.
Break that chase you out. What's your
We're good. We're ready.
9:59. I got a minute.
1 minute.
I got 1 minute.
Maybe really fast.
Going twice. Nobody? Nobody? All right.
Wait a minute.
Here's your mic, watch your hurry.
Why am I?
Yes.
I just, would you please reiterate the inverse square law? As light goes out.
So as light goes out, it loses power in an inverse square amount. So the way to look at it is at light, 1 foot away is at 100% power. At 2 feet it goes to 25. At 3 feet it goes to 9. At 4 feet it goes to like 3 points. It drops. So that's the reason why photographers, when you see photographers on big sets, they have huge light modifiers and very powerful packs, and for group shots, and they have them a ways away from stuff, right? You don't really have to worry about the inverse square law until you have more than one subject, right? And you're trying to light that one subject with the same light source. So if you're doing portraits, if you're doing headshots, it's really important. But the minute you get like essentially a group shot, rows 1, 2, and 3, if you're not careful, row 3 could be, 2 stops darker. So in that case, just bring it back and move forward. By the way, I'm not a huge light meter person. I don't carry one, or I don't even own one anymore. I'm thinking about buying one just for more of my movie stuff. But if you had a light meter, the solution, like if you were doing stuff on your own, like if you knew you had a row 1, a row 2, and a row 3, stand at row 1, hit your light meter, stand at row 2, hit your light meter, stand at row 3, hit your light meter. You could either quickly do the math in your head or see the difference, or even now in some of them, you could actually get an average, right? And you really don't want the difference to be much more than a quarter of a stop from row 1 to row 3, right? If anything, you want them to be the exact same power. But you can just be like F8 at row 1, F8 at row 2, F8 at row 3, then you know you're good. And you can do that before your group comes in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.